To have you back. You're still watching TVC Breakfast, and this is FCT Brief. We're still discussing electoral reforms with the just concluded by-election as a case study. Well, we have with us still Achike, Chude and Cynthia Mbamalu. And just before we went on the break, Cynthia Mbamalu was telling us of how this reform still needs to be worked on, insinuates improvement. Well, you would like to go with the question, Chude?
From the feedback you got from the field, the by-election just concluded, one thing is common. People were talking about low voter turnout. Now that impacts on credibility of the process. And it's also part of the responsibility of INEC and the responsibility of the various political parties. Would you say that voter education is being handled seriously? And how do we deal with the issue of apathy of voters?
I think voter education has been relatively fairly well handled, and I will tell you why. Don't forget that we're making this statement or this discussion on the backdrop of the 2023 general elections. And that was the period where voter consciousness or awareness had gotten to the peak. Let's not forget what we are seeing on the streets all over the country. Lots of Nigerians trooping out to register for the election, especially the young ones, everywhere. Some were also, arrange their private, if you want to attract the younger generation of people, you look for ways, you devise means to get them interested in the process. And so in some of these areas, like I remember the Tafawa Balewa Square in Lagos, they had this big party kind of atmosphere, carnival, and there they were doing registration. A lot of young people were coming out to register. It was like that over the country. Why did they get to that level? Because somehow we in the civil society, the media also played a role. We're able to convince the people that the process is changing and that the process is getting better. So that drove a lot of people. And then we now came up with the magic word. Beavers is the game changer. So a lot of people imbibed it, a lot of people believed in it. If in spite of the previous periods of disillusionment, the 2023 general elections and all that, we saw that witnessed a low point in the electoral process and all that. But eventually, we were able to, and then we began to see the governments beginning to look a bit positively at elections in the country. Yaradua came out, he made that famous statement that the election that brought him to power was flawed. But regardless of that, this is what they are going to do, is set up the WISE Commission. They made recommendations. Some of these recommendations were taken. Some of them were not taken, obviously. And then we now had situations where you had an opposition party, for instance, at the center, that also allowed victories for the opposition, that did not go to, so you now, and it's at that moment that you hear statements like, under Jonathan, the opposition party was able to win.
But my worry is that despite the huge voter turnout, there's a huge disparity between voting, actual voting, and the number
we are getting there. These are some of the whether technicalities or whatever. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that, we got to the peak of public expectation and belief that things were beginning to change after the Achike election, the Osun State election, the Anambra election, and all of that. That gave us a lot of hope, and people now trooped out in that process, and then somehow they were dampened. So I've always maintained, even before this election, that the Nigerian people do not have anything to prove. INEC has everything to prove, because Nigerians have done their bit, and they are looking at INEC and they are saying, no, this is not what we bargained for. But it's not just an INEC thing, because for an election to be to be seen to be fairly credible, fair, transparent, and all that. There are so many things that come into it. Even the processes before the election is important. That's why you're talking about electoral reform. Electoral reforms have to happen before the process, the election itself. You understand? And then so there are all manners of activities. And if you look at this last election, for instance, where you even notice failures, apart from the little progress we saw, but where you notice failures, it's not just failure of the election management, body, that is the INEC. It's also failure of the security apparatus, like what we witnessed in Kano and a few other places where you had pockets of violence, and then, of course, so it's not just an INEC thing. Now, it's difficult. You need to begin. How are you going to now drive the people back again? Because you are talking about political awareness and the rest, and it's not about political awareness. Right. It's about the outcome. It's about what they have seen. So sometimes you have this disparity, and it has been happening. And that accounts even for the question you're asking. You have a lot of registered voters. In a particular state, you could have as much as 5 million registered. 1.2 million registered voters. How many people turn out to vote? About 200,000 people sometimes. In some places in Anambra, for instance, that tends to have the lowest, voter participation in an electoral process. You have as little as 12% of voter turnout, and it impinges to some extent, even on the overall assessment of that election, on the credibility of the process itself.